Peace. It's your brother. So, I want to discuss critical race theory, right? But first, let's talk about race. We know that race is a socially man-made construct. It's a social construct. So this whole thing about the critical race theory is just that it's a theory, right? And what it is it's based on a bunch of people having bad feelings, not feeling well about certain things that's being discussed, right? And they want to put parameters on these things that's being discussed because they feel as if it's attacking quote unquote Caucasian America. The reality is this: the American shores has a history that sits upon on these shores. There's a history here, and history is a very valid tool that we utilize, right? Regardless. Now the problem is this: in this day and time, the Caucasian constituents or the Europeans that's crying for this, the conservative paradigm, so on and so forth, that's crying for this thing to to take place or to not take place and to not be taught in schools or whatever, so on and so forth. The reality is that your founding fathers, your ancestors, you understand what I'm saying? They were very big on doing vile things and recording it. You understand what I'm saying? They recorded their history. They recorded all of the atrocious, vile, savage acts that they did apart in, during the time of history. They recorded it, especially on these shores. So you can't get upset when the sins of the father come back to haunt the children in these days and times, because this is a historical reference that we're dealing with. See, critical race theory, what they're talking about is an idea, right? What they're saying is that you're making us feel uncomfortable because you're saying that all quote unquote white people is racist. We're not saying that. What's being stated is history is being taught. And what history shows is that a particular demographic of this society practiced and perfected tactics that would be considered brutal, that would be considered harmful, and so on and so forth. This demographic of people conspired to make sure that other people who looked unlike them suffered through Jim Crow. See, Jim Crow is a real paradigm. It's a real piece of history. 100 years of lynching, that's a real piece of history. You understand what I'm saying? 100 years of straight lynching, and we can't even get an anti-lynching bill. You see what I mean? So, slavery was a real, actual piece of history. Segregation, integration was a real, actual piece of history. You know what I'm saying? Tulsa, Oklahoma, Elaine, Arkansas, Wilmington, North Carolina, Delaware. All of this stuff was actual pieces of history that actually took place. You cannot deny actual history. You understand what I'm saying? So for those Europeans and those Caucasians who are pushing that paradigm, see, the problem is that it only works for you. See, quote unquote, the psychology of whiteness is that we only pay attention to what affects us. Anything else other than that, it doesn't exist. It doesn't affect us. It has no bearing. This is why the critical race theory is in the way it's being pushed the way it's pushed, because they're pushing it because it doesn't benefit their interests. They want to destroy it because it doesn't benefit their interests. But you can't destroy authentic history. You can destroy an idea or a psychology, but you can't destroy authentic history. You can't rewrite the history books when you have actual people on the planet who actually know the true history. You can't rewrite the history books to make you feel better in this day and time and say things like, oh, slavery was good and it was healthy for the slaves. You can't do that because we have records from the slaves themselves that say it was the opposite. We have records from the slave masters themselves that say it was the opposite. So you can't get upset when certain things are being taught in the school system because it's based on actual history. And there's many things that hasn't been taught in the school system. That's actual history that hasn't been taught because the school system has always had a bias on history. Always. I'm a historian and I have a master's degree and I was a social studies teacher. You know what I'm saying? I taught history and social studies in the schools, and I know that the system puts a limitation on what can be taught and how it's taught. Certain information cannot be taught in the schools, period, because it's not a part of the curriculum of the state. You understand what I'm saying? So therefore, certain information has to be taught outside of that school. And it has to be taught from a true perspective about what really happened on these shores. You can't teach it from a one-sided perspective. You understand what I'm saying? The victors of the war tells the stories. Nah, the story is also being told by those who have experienced and have been oppressed by the winners of the wars and so on and so forth. So the reality is that this critical race theory shines a light on the history of this country, a light that hasn't been shined at all. Certain things have been talked about and touched, but now it's getting wide open because, see, we're in a new era of time, and in this era of time, there is nothing that's hidden. You can't hide anymore. You can't hide these particular types of paradigms because it's already written and etched in the echelons of history, geographically, you know what I'm saying, archaeologically, historically, genetically, psychologically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It's already embedded. The history of these shores are already here, and you can't change the dynamic of the history, even though it affects, you know what I'm saying, how you may be dealing in your own dealings or your own paradigm being quote unquote a Caucasian American. Now you got to remember the culture we're in. We're in a cancel culture and all of this other stuff. So you're going to see the whole ideal of racism and all of these things being pushed to the extremes. But listen, here's the problem that I do have. In this day and time, quote unquote, the white man is not holding you back. That's something I can't deal with. That's something that I can't agree with. You're holding your own self back by creating and producing and pushing a narrative that's based on something that has really no bearing. It's actually making you stagnant. It's stopping you from actually being the best you can be because you're buying into an idea that doesn't exist no more. I'm watching television and I'm watching 6 millionaires, 6 Asiatic, quote unquote, black millionaires talk about all of the racism in America, but yet they're millionaires. The racism didn't stop them from becoming millionaires, so how could it stop you? You understand what I'm saying? Why would you buy into the idea that the white man is the problem? He was a problem at one point in time, no doubt about it. But he's not the problem today. The problem is your own thinking, and that you have a thinking that may mimic that particular demographic or that particular historical enemy. You may have a mind that mimics it and doesn't even recognize it. You understand what I'm saying? You are not allowing yourself to be the best you can be because you're buying into an idea. So the reality for me is critical race theory, that's not history. What they're doing is they're fighting to basically make themselves look good and say and to say oh, all white people aren't racist. You can't say that we're all racist and blah 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 and that's what that's about in this day and time. But the reality is your forefathers laid the foundation. They created a system that's unequal, and you still benefit from that system today. You aren't trying to overthrow the system to change it, to bring equality into the system that everybody may be able to have wealth and riches distributed equally. You won't do that because the psychology of whiteness doesn't allow you to do that. You understand what I'm saying? And whiteness is just the psychology where everything is based upon a European base and standard. And everything that is European base and standard is only what it is of interest to them. So anything that is the alternative of the European ideas and so on and so forth, it will not fit into their reality. In other words, it don't suit them. It's not what they're looking for. So they can't see it. They can't see the things that we see because it's not in their best self-interest to see it. You understand what I mean? So it's not allowed, they don't allow themselves to see it, but that's okay. This is why we must continue to tell our own stories, to tell our own history. You understand what I'm saying? So it won't be none of this nonsense. And what's being taught in the schools, you're talking about critical race theory being taught in the schools, but you're not discussing about all of the pedophilia, the homosexuality, in the LGBTQ stuff that's being taught from the kindergarten to the 6th grade. You're not discussing those things either, though. But you're worrying about the critical race theory, but you're not discussing how your children are being destroyed. You know what I'm saying? And their minds are being tampered with and so on and so forth. You're not discussing that. So we need to discuss those things as well. Peace.